That's the most detail I'll get into, I promise. Next, how I choose the color for each blob. The colors go from dull to bright from the bottom of the cyclone to the top, corresponding to the trip from black and white or sepia tone, depending on what version of the film you've seen, Kansas, to the Technicolor world of Oz. But why those particular colors? I grabbed a bunch of shots from the Munchkinland sequence in the film from the internet and throwing in a photo of the ruby slippers just to make sure I would have enough of that color. Then I counted the number of pixels of every color across all the pictures. I had written a program to do that for an earlier project. That produces a file that I read in to get my list of colors. I sort it according to the difference each color is from gray. That is the average absolute difference from the average of red, green, and blue components of the color. So something that's a pure red is going to be much higher in that than an orange or a duller, like a rust, say. Or for that matter, gray. Gray is going to be very low. Then, when I'm placing the blobs, I check how far the start of the swoop is from the bottom of the image proportionately. And I use that for the color of each blob on the swoop. I thought about using the position of each blob, but you don't get, if you do that, you don't get the sensation as much of the movement. Which brings us to how I did the swoops. I'm not going to go into the heavy maths on this because although I've done them in an earlier life, I don't do them myself, but I use a library of someone else's code. I use cubic splines, which are essentially a way of fitting equations to points piecewise so that they are smooth. The details of how to do it are readily available on the internet. I actually use two splines, one for horizontal and one for vertical. For this, you need to have a number of points, and you need to know the derivative of the curve at the first point. For the first section, I default the derivative to be 0, and you get the derivatives that you need after that from the equation that you have for the first part. So, I pick 4 random points initially and fit the curve to the first section between the first 2 points of that. Then I use the information from that, i.e. the derivative of the curve at the second point, and the last 3 points of the 4, so points 2 through 4, and add a new random point onto that. Then I use that to determine the second section of the curve, and so on and so on. This makes each section of the cyclone smoothly meet up with the previous one. Now, I generate all the word shapes before I start placing them. So once I have a section of spline, I place the next words along it evenly, determined by how big the largest word on the section is. And by largest, I mean how much space it takes up, not necessarily how many letters it is. I could do something more sophisticated, but this seems to work all right. Now, how do I make the swoops come together into a cyclone? This is back to the magic of using regions. So another preliminary step in the process is assigning regions so the program can know what is cyclone and what is not. I have another program that analyzes a hand-drawn sketch and determines all the contiguous regions in it. Again, something I needed for an earlier project. It effectively assigns a color to each point depending on what section it belongs to. It's not quite each point because it doesn't assign colors to the lines. You can't really tell in this picture, but the three sections in this image on the right are different colors. They are off by 1 in the red part of the RGB, that's red, green, blue definition. Then, when I'm picking points for the splines, I just make sure that the very first point is in the cyclone part of the screen. Then I refer to that image to check whether the next random point has the same region point as the first one, and if it doesn't, I pick again. And so it all comes together like this. I'm just going to let this animation of the twister being built up run for a bit. It goes for longer than I think anyone's really interested in watching. The one thing that I haven't mentioned before this is that every so often I blur the entire image so that you end up with some parts of the twister being, so that you end up with a little bit of a sensation of depth. I'm not actually that happy with my process for doing that yet. Future works. I'd like to thank you for listening. I know it's an extremely long piece here. If you have questions, please find the comments or my contact information on the exhibition page. Ta!